Hi, this is Bruce Whipple, and welcome to the Business Acquisition Podcast. This is where we talk about how to acquire an already profitable business rather than build one from scratch. In the past 25 years, I've acquired several businesses, and I've also built several businesses from scratch. And I can tell you that it's a lot easier to do the former rather than the latter. You may know me from my association with Dan Peña, who I've worked with and been partners with for more than 25 years. Dan is gracious enough to mention me quite often in his videos, and it's been a real pleasure working with Dan, and one of the few people that I call a true friend. And actually, we've worked on many acquisitions together as well. And even though I said it was easier to acquire a business rather than build one from scratch, that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy. I often say that QLA is simple, but please don't make the mistake of thinking that simple is the same thing as easy. It still requires hard work. In the last couple of weeks, I've had a couple of interactions which really drove home the point to me on how critical communication is in general, but specifically on the QLA process. So let's talk about that this week. What it used to be in the old days is you would, as Dan Peña, my mentor, said, use shoe leather. You'd go call somebody, set an appointment, and then meet with them face-to-face to discuss whatever it was you wanted to discuss. That took a lot of time, but the results of face-to-face kind of speak for themselves. But today it is so much easier to connect, whether that's on LinkedIn, which we use an awful lot, Facebook, Google, finding articles of people you want to talk to. But that certainly has its risks, the email communication chain. Now, everybody uses email, and you can certainly, with one email, reach hundreds of people with the push of a button. But let's talk about what you don't have in an email. You don't have any ability to read body language. You don't have any visual of what the person looks like, whether they look to the side, whether they nod their head, body language again. You don't have any feedback on, does it look like they're buying what you're selling? And if you can see an objection, you can begin to ask some questions. Basically, what you do is get into a conversation. And with an email, it's a one-way communication at best. Maybe just a one-way message is a better way to put it. So let's look at two examples, because I think case studies often are a great way to drive home a point. The first is with a mentee. I am going to leave his name out, but he did everything right. He contacted through LinkedIn a prospective board member. He, on his own nickel, flew up to New York to meet with this person, sat down and had a face-to-face meeting. Absolutely the right way to do it. Did it require an investment on his part in both time and money? Absolutely. But you can't beat that face-to-face. Then after the meeting, there was a follow-up, and it was an email that went back and forth, and my mentee sent an email that actually he felt a little uncomfortable with, but we decided to send it anyway. He had met the person, he knew the person, I didn't, so I said, trust your gut and go with it. So he ended up sending it. He got back a reply, which was nice, professional, but basically it said we're not a fit. And so that's an example of if that discussion, rather than an email, had taken place, even on a phone call, he could have asked the questions, does that make sense to you? He could have gotten some feedback on what didn't make sense, ask, why do you think we're not a fit? And that conversation could have gone a lot different. Now, ultimately, if we're not a fit, and if it's because of the QLA process that the person on the other end perceived, it's probably a blessing in disguise that that relationship ended. But the point of this is that you lose all of the ability to gauge that. Simple as what makes you uncomfortable, what makes you think that this is not a fit, and to have that discussion. Now remember that statistic we talked about several times of it takes 5 no's usually to get a yes, and that 92% of salespeople give up after the 4th no. So you're going to run into obstacles, you're going to run into objections, and the ability to have a conversation to handle that and answer those and maybe turn a no into a yes is best done if you've got an open communication. That doesn't usually happen in an email. The other thing an email does is it lets people or encourages people because there's some anonymity in an email, to say things they would never say if they were sitting across from the person. So let me give you an example of that. I get a lot of emails from people who are interested in what I'm doing, how I can help them, et cetera, et cetera. And I got an email this week from a person. It was a 2-page email, 900 words, pretty daunting to read that actually from somebody I don't know, and how many of those can you handle in the course of a day? It basically, at the end of that email, said, anyway, please provide the non-compete, non-disclosure agreement so we can begin discussing the potentiality of acquiring this business and growing its services and then franchising it nationwide and overseas into other countries. Okay, so that's a bit of a presumption when we don't even know each other, right? So I wrote back to him that said basically that I only do business with people that I've trained or worked with through this, much like what Dan says when he says that he only goes into business with people he's trained in QLA. So I get back, I didn't think that was terribly objectionable. I just explained kind of the ground rules. I get back an email, Bruce, on your site, you ask people to submit an offering to purchase a business, then write back and say, no, thank you. I don't get it. What's up? Okay. I don't think I say that on my website, so I asked him to point me to where that was on the website. He pointed me to a video in which I said I helped people that I mentor acquire businesses and that we acquire businesses. When I said we, I meant through the process of helping a mentee. He didn't take it that way. He's the only person who's never understood that, but that's okay. I always assume that if there's a mistake in communication, that responsibility is on me. So essentially, I explained what the process was, how I work with mentees to help them acquire businesses, etc. And then I didn't think that was terribly argumentative, but at all, really. But I got back an email, and I want to read this email to you because I think it points out an awful lot of things that are helpful. I did not come to argue with you, Bruce. I came to purchase a biz and keep present management in place and then franchise it. Pretty easy to understand, though I will admit maybe too much information was provided for you to handle. But that additional information was provided so that you could understand the full scope of what I'm looking to do. Apparently, you are not able to understand that plan. However, I had thought that you were smart enough to read and comprehend my strategy, but apparently you are not! Exclamation point. Maybe it's just me being a little green about how to bring business plans to such incredibly smart, intelligent, more experienced people as yourself. Much greater than us mere mortals. But isn't that the point of seeking out stalwarts as yourself? Actually, a lot of that I agree with. It is important to deal with people who have been there, done that. So I agree with that. Maybe not the way he said it, though. But in reality, instead of asking me questions about the content of the email, so you can understand my plan, so that we can move forward, you want to argue. If this is how your passion to work with entrepreneurs shows itself, you might want to retire. Lastly, and quite honestly, Brucey, since you are not someone I can intelligently discuss a matter with, which is so because all you want to do is prove, misspelled, yourself and how baseless and ignorant I am, even though you yourself are not able to read my email business directive and figure it out, what's the point of spending any more time with an a-hole? I've got a clean rating on these podcasts, so I shortened that to a-hole, but that is not what he wrote. Have a truly blessed life, snowflake. Okay. Well, that's a pretty entertaining email. Obviously, a chip on his shoulder. But, when I thought about this, I'm kind of glad that this occurred because, one, it points out when you send an email, and this was a lesson I was told by a lawyer a long time ago, whenever you send an email, don't send an email that you would be upset if it were on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, because someday it just might be. And I always say, think about what it is you want that email to do. What's the reaction you want to get from that email? Now, maybe he just wanted to vent. That's okay. I replied to that, best of luck, and that was it. But how would that discussion have been different if instead of presuming that I wanted to go into business with him and presuming I had the time to read a proposal and asking me to get back with a non-compete, he just sent something as simple as, I'd love to know how you work. Can we set up a time to talk? I don't know what that is, 10 or 12 words in that sentence. It's not certainly 900 plus words. And a lot of times we assume, and this is really important when you talk about bringing members on a dream team, we assume that what's important to us is important to the other person. Now, this email and having me help him with this business was important to him, but why would it be important to me? And I always say, when you're contacting people, whether it be dream team members, accountants, lawyers, financial institutions, think about why it's important to them. Think about what you can do to explain that to them so that they are interested in doing something with you. So, enough on that email. Lots of good lessons in that, certainly. And I would say one of the biggest is the lack of communication and the inability to enter into a conversation. And actually, this podcast is a pretty good example of this. This podcast lets me get a message out to an awful lot of people. Thankful for that, and hopefully it's useful. But does it give you a chance to ask a question? Well, if you hit and send back to Bruce at brucewhipple.com, you can do that and ask a question. But the podcast itself is a one-way communication, and I think that's important. So remember the value of a phone call, a Zoom call, better yet, meeting face-to-face. It lets you read body language. It lets you ask open-ended questions. It lets you gauge tone of voice, eye contact. It lets you handle objections, all of which are really important when it comes to the interaction, particularly the first interaction. You know, it's been said a number of times by Dan. It's been said a number of times by me. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. That's absolutely true. So think about the importance of face-to-face, or at least communication, which has a feedback mechanism. Emails don't do that. So I'd encourage you in the very beginning of a relationship to opt on the side of being able to get that feedback through an open conversation with the person. Okay, hopefully that helps. It was, I'm going to save this email. It was as entertaining an email as I have received in a long time. I haven't been called a snowflake before either, so I've been called an a-hole a bunch of times, but never a snowflake before. So that is a first, and I guess I thank him for that. Okay, so if you have any questions or comments or ideas for future episodes, please email Bruce at brucewhipple.com. And if you're not already on our mailing list, head over to brucewhipple.com and sign up and grab any of the free reports. That'll put you on the mailing list. There is a lot of free information you can use to acquire already profitable businesses. This is Bruce Whipple. Thanks for listening to the Business Acquisition Podcast. And remember, you miss 100% of the opportunities you fail to take. And procrastination truly is the thief of time. So do something today, please. Your future self will be proud of.